Trump's, what he calls his big, beautiful bill, contains a provision that would prevent federal judges from holding those who violate their orders in contempt, which in other words would emasculate the courts and make them an irrelevancy. The U.S. Supreme Court is never going to stand for that. Even the most conservative members are not going to be made irrelevant because their orders will have no effect.
Overnight, the stock markets have been rallying after a US court blocked Donald Trump's use of sweeping tariffs. They said an emergency law he used does not unilaterally give him the authority to impose tariffs on nearly every other country on Earth. The White House have quickly appealed that decision. It could end up in the US Supreme Court. But for now, it means that Trump may lose the tariff powers he cherishes. Let's speak first to Andrew Hale, who's a senior analyst in trade policy at the Heritage Foundation. They're the conservative US think tank who helped generate Trump's policies. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
Very good. Very nice to speak to you on this Thursday afternoon. Let's talk about the ruling. It's going to apply to almost all of the tariffs Trump imposed on overseas goods, except the 25% tariffs on steel, aluminium and cars. Why the difference?
Well, because steel and aluminium were declared under the legal process. The president has legal authority, as he used in his first term, the 301, the 201, and the 232 tariffs. But that's a legal process. It takes about 8 to 9 months to get out the door, build a legal case, draft a report, consult with Congress and other stakeholders. And by using IEEPA, they sought to, in this term, circumvent that legal process by just throwing these tariffs out. And IEEPA is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The word tariff does not appear in that legislation. It's never been used by any president before. There's no president to use it to implement tariffs. And Congress did not give that IEEPA to the president in 1977 with the intention that it would ever be used to implement tariffs. So it was a misuse of emergency legislation. And so now the president can go back to illegally implementing tariffs through the appropriate legal processes through the 301, the 201, and the 232 tariffs.
So by the sounds of things, you don't think this is a massive obstacle to the strategy they've been pursuing so far, which is impose the tariffs, quickly push to seal trade deals. UK was first. Keir Starmer made much of it, even though there wasn't a huge amount in it that was good for the UK. You know, try and get on the president's good side.
It's a huge setback.
Oh, it's a huge setback.
Oh, absolutely. Because basically with IEEPA, what they're trying to do is basically, I said to the campaign, someone at the campaign told me when they announced last year they were going to use emergency legislation, I said, no president has the authority to impose a baseline tariff of 10%, 20%, or anything like that on the whole world. The office of the president doesn't have that power. And they said, oh, don't worry, we'll use emergency legislation. And I said, well, that'll be illegal. And they said, well, we'll just try it anyway and see how it goes. That was what I was told at the time. I thought that was just election bravado, election rhetoric. I didn't think that they were actually going to do this. And so, of course, I was quite surprised when President Trump was elected. And very soon after, they did go down this route of using IEEPA, and the court has correctly checked that. And of course, under IEEPA, you have to declare a genuine emergency first. Well, what's the genuine emergency with regards to declaring tariffs on the whole world as they did on Liberation Day? They said the justification was the trade deficit. Well, we've been running trade deficits for the whole world for decades. That's not a genuine emergency, and the court decided yesterday that it wasn't.
If you could advise the White House to do one thing now, what would it be?
Well, in President Trump's first term, he was expertly advised by Peter Navarro to use the president's legal authority to implement tariffs, the 301, the 201, and the 232 tariffs. And I would advise the White House to bring back Ambassador Lighthizer. He's a brilliant negotiator, and he does it by the book.
Well, that's some sound advice for Donald Trump. I don't know if he's a Times Radio listener, but maybe he'll catch up later. Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst in Trade Policy at the influential Heritage Foundation think tank. Thank you very much for joining us here on Times Radio. So what is the president going to do now? Does this play into his classic, he's done this before, the courts are against me agenda? It's a judicial coup, in the words of White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Let's see what David Cay Johnston thinks. He's the author of It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America and the Making of Donald Trump's two definitive books on the president's rise. David, how are you?
Just fine. Glad to be with you, Patrick.
Glad to be speaking to you. Obviously, the first thing the White House did after this news broke was, we are going to appeal. I've just given you Stephen Miller's words. Judicial coup is out of control. Now, there are obviously huge technicalities to deal with in terms of the trade policy, the legalities, but Donald Trump, on some level, will absolutely relish another fight with judges, won't he?
Well, perhaps he will lose in this case, and the three judges on this specialized court, one of whom Trump appointed, have written a decision that basically is a primer for the U.S. Supreme Court on trade law, because what Donald was doing was completely outside the law, as your previous guest noted. But you have to understand that Donald, and I've been saying this since at least 2011, Donald believes that as president, he is America's dictator. In fact, he has said, I have an Article 2, referring to part of the U.S. Constitution, that says I can do anything I want. And he has been behaving in this administration as America's dictator, removing sources of accountability like inspectors general, attacking judges who uphold the Constitution. And so he's also been humiliated around the world now by this court decision that any of us could have told him a long time ago, you can't do this. But he doesn't believe that. He really does believe he holds dictatorial powers.
You use the word humiliated there, and there's nobody who hates being humiliated like the president, particularly by judges. Always his great nemesis. He's not going to take this lying down, is he? And for me, listening to you talk about dictatorial tendencies, how he's been interpreting the powers of the presidency, it does seem that we might be in for an almighty crash of obviously it's already happened in some respects, but Donald Trump might just ignore the courts. I mean, obviously there are constitutional constraints, but he's not going to want to ultimately lie down, roll over, whatever metaphor you want to use, is he? This might well be the moment that he tries to flex his muscles in the way you described now.
Oh, absolutely. Trump's, what he calls his big, beautiful bill, contains a provision that would prevent federal judges from holding those who violate their orders in contempt, which in other words would emasculate the courts and make them an irrelevancy. The U.S. Supreme Court is never going to stand for that. Even the most conservative members are not going to be made irrelevant because their orders will have no effect. But Donald is an appallingly ignorant man. It's one of the first things I learned when he and I first spoke 37 years ago was how he didn't know anything. And he's a con artist, and he operates from bullying, making promises he may or may not be able to keep, and then attacking the integrity of anyone who questions whatever he chooses to do at the moment.
Well, David Cay Johnston, Trump biographer, thank you very much for joining us here on Times Radio to talk us through how the president might respond emotionally and politically. Not entirely sure those two things are different in the case of Donald Trump a lot of the time, but there we are. How he's going to respond to that court ruling, that bombshell court ruling overnight that ruled his tariffs illegal, those blanket tariffs. Let's see who wins out in that fight between the courts and the White House. As our previous expert Andrew Hale told us, it's probably going to be the courts, but you never know in America.